welcome to the S.O.A.P video series from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. We are starting a brand new series through a book that we all know and love.
Yeah.
And we're going to take about, I think, 7 or 8 weeks.
That long? Yep.
Yeah, about
to get through
about 7 sessions, I think, to get through it, which is really short given the book that we're tackling.
Yeah. And the book's name is?
Paul's Epistle to the Romans.
Right, so Romans.
The book of Romans.
Yeah. So this was written by the Apostle Paul on his third mission trip. And if we think about it, Paul took at least 3 mission trips that we know of, probably more, going around planting churches. And you can kind of see he's getting closer and closer to Rome.
Yeah.
And I got to think he had his eyes on
He
it.
absolutely wanted to get to Rome. Where better? Think of Paul's strategy. As you look through the book of Acts, Paul's strategy is to bypass the small towns, get to the big city of the region or the area, plant a solid church there, and then move on and let them do the work in the other thing.
Yeah, so we're bigger than Rome.
Yeah.
It's the financial powerhouse. It's the army.
The government.
Yeah, the government's there, and the philosophers.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, everybody is there, and this is Paul, who was taught by the best Jewish teachers.
Yep.
Came to Christ by Jesus, another pretty good teacher. Yeah, right. He had to be itching for that, didn't he?
Well, and he had already gone toe to toe with the philosophers in Athens.
Yep.
And so, I mean, it would be like for an American today to say, I want to go to Washington, D.C., convert D.C. because it'll change the whole nation.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, from Paul as an apostle, as an evangelist, why wouldn't he want to do that?
Yeah, and he longed to go there, and you're going to be reading that this week.
Yeah.
So the big news is, or the big thing is, who founded the church in Rome?
Well, I'll give you 3 guesses.
I don't know. I don't think we know.
Well
right?
done. Yeah. There's really no way to know. Some people say Peter did.
Right.
One of Paul's things is that one of the big reasons he wanted to go to Rome, in addition to what we had already talked about, is that he wanted to start a church there because he said he didn't want to build on somebody else's ministry.
Okay.
Which means that the concept that Peter had started the church or one of the other apostles had started the church, even Paul didn't think that. He wanted to actually be the one to start that church.
Right.
So it seems like there was maybe a loose knit group of people. It was a church. There was an assembly, but it hadn't been founded or planted like a lot of the other ones. And he wanted to get there to help establish it because nobody else had.
Yeah, and I think that plays into how we read Romans too, because there wasn't a strong apostle or a person that led this church. So Paul coming in as a teacher, he's got to go, I got to start at ground zero.
Yeah.
I got to start at the beginning.
I don't know what you know.
Right, exactly. So I know you're a church. I believe you're believers, but let's just back up and start at the beginning.
Well, what's really interesting is that, like in Ephesians, Ephesians, he was in Ephesus for 3 years, and yet the letter that we call Ephesians, no personal greetings at all. Romans, you get down to chapter 16, and there's this list of names, just name after name after, and the church that meets in their house, and their group, and all these names, and he'd never been there.
Yeah.
So he knows.
Yeah. But he's getting letters, and people are meeting him all the time, and we think, back in the old days, it was so hard, but there was a lot of travel going around.
Oh, tons of travel, and that was partially. A lot of it was because of the Pax Romana, the Peace of Rome, where Roman citizens could go anywhere in the empire, and secondly, the Roman highway system.
Yeah,
they had
not only did they have the authority, they had the means.
The means to do it, and so for Paul to literally be able to go from, if we think of the map, from Israel all the way over to Rome. I mean, there was a highway system that allowed him to do that. And he could use a ship, he could use the roads, and it was unprecedented in human history, that type of capability.
Yeah, Kind of cool. So Paul says right in the first couple chapters, or at least in the first chapter, why he wrote this letter, and he specifically is saying, I am sending, you a gospel message.
Yep.
So it seems to make sense that, again, there wasn't that formal big teacher there. And it also makes sense that there was already something there.
Yep.
And that Paul, basically, I think of it as this is his thesis.
Yeah.
That he's writing, and he's throwing it on the table, and he's telling them, let's talk.
Yeah.
We're gonna have some fun.
Well, and Romans is the most theologically rich, doctrinally rich letter to any of the Gentile churches. Let's say mostly Gentile. There were a lot of Jews there too, but mostly Gentile church. The only other book that really rivals it in terms of the depth of theology is Hebrews, which was written to Jewish believers. So we really have both sides, the Jew and the Gentile side of theology that we can put this together. The book of Romans mentions every major doctrine, or addresses there's 11 major doctrines, major categories of theology. All 11 of them are mentioned in Romans.
I said, he's starting at the beginning, and here's everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, chapter 1, it's kind of funny. What I find myself doing was just copying verses. And then after I had about half the chapter in there, I was like, we gotta weed some of this out. So
there's only so much time on the video.
Yeah,
right?
well, this definitely is a very limited overview of what's going on. We could be spending weeks and weeks on these.
Well, it's funny because I've got friends who are pastors, and they want to go into a new church. If they get called to a new church, and make sure that everybody's on the same page doctrinally, and the whole thing. So they start with Romans. And they'll take 3 years to preach through Romans, teach through Romans, because they want to make sure they mine the depths of it. Okay, well, we've got about 7, short videos to do this.
Yeah, exactly. So we got to keep moving, right? So we find in chapter 1, verse 15, thus I am eager to also preach the gospel to you who are in Rome. Yep. So, it's a gospel message.
Yep.
And he talks about, there's a famous verse right after that, for I'm not ashamed of the gospel. It's God's power for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. Mm-hmm. And, that verse gets brought up a lot.
Yeah.
And, continues here.
Yeah. It wasn't just his theology, it was also his practice. Everywhere he went to the synagogue first, always preached to the Jew first, the gospel. And then he would also preach to the Gentiles, but every Sabbath that he had the opportunity to speak in a synagogue, he always went there first.
So would Rome have had a large Jewish population?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
What came not too long after that? Where they were getting rid of all the Jews and the persecution.
Yeah.
That's the word I was trying to find.
Yeah.
So that hadn't quite started yet.
Well,
we're still a ways away.
Right. So, a little bit off and on. So, the emperor before Nero was Claudius, and according to Acts 18, he had started kicking Jews out of Rome. I don't want Jews in Rome. So that's where Aquila and Priscilla were 2 Jews, Christians, in Rome. They had been kicked out, and Paul hooked up with them in Corinth, and they did some ministry together because they had the same job, tent making, and some of that same work. But the reason that they were in Corinth was because they had been kicked out of Rome by Claudius. Okay. So, but then it wasn't until Nero that the persecution, killing them and everything, and then it was Jews and Christians, and
Okay. Right.
But there was lots of Jews in Rome, so plenty of synagogues, plenty of places to preach the gospel. When Paul was in Rome under arrest in Acts 28, he met with the Jewish leaders. They came to meet with him because he wanted. He had written them all,
right?
And the Christians and the other Jewish leaders, and he was preaching to them. And for 2 years under house arrest there, he met with as many people as he could. Lots and lots of Jews.
Okay, good. So in chapter 1 and chapter 2, Paul starts off by really addressing three groups of people, and he kind of takes it, he's taking his time with it. It is quite a long letter. And this first group of people, categorize them as, people who don't believe in God or pagans.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And even possibly I've heard it called uncivilized pagans.
Yeah.
Because in chapter 2, he talks about more people, more sophisticated unbelievers, sophisticated Gentiles.
Yeah. I think I threw in the people that don't believe in God just because it seemed to me if you're starting at the beginning and you're laying out a gospel message, you got to talk about God.
Right.
That's where you start. Certainly Jesus is going to be in here,
Yep.
but he's starting with God. And basically the premise is you need to believe in God. And for new Christians, it's always, well, what about the people who don't hear the gospel message? And I love that it's addressed.
He addresses it right here.
Yep. So in chapter 1, verse 18 through 32, it's all in there, and I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'd love to, but to paraphrase it, God's attributes have been clearly seen in nature, so we are without excuse not to believe in God.
Yep. And so
I love that.
So creation is a witness to God's existence, at least God's power, right? Psalm 19 says the heavens declare the glory of God. It shows his handiwork. So Paul's saying the same thing. But it's interesting because what that does is creation, and we'll see the same thing with our conscience in chapter 2. Creation gives us enough information to condemn us, but not enough to save us. Creation doesn't tell us about Jesus or the cross or the gospel. It tells us that there's a God out there that is bigger than we are.
Right. And yet some people may even understand that, but choose not to follow it.
Right.
Right, so they go the other way, and also in these verses, we learn that God said, "Okay, I'm going to let you do it, and you're going to be in your own depravity, and you become foolish, and God's going to let you wallow around."
Yeah, and it gives a list of things that what we do, just as humans, just generally, what we do in place of God.
We make up, and it's basically we're making up our own God, right? So imagine idols. Idols show up in there, all over the place.
And I love the phrase that we tend to worship the creation rather than the creator.
Right.
I mean, it's a great turn of phrase, and I mean it's true.
Yep.
We bring God down to us instead of trying to get up to God.
Right.
Right. And when God already brought himself down to us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in chapter 2, he switches to a new group, and I know we're going through this quick, but my Bible says the condemnation of the moralist in the Bible. I kind of like that term, but philosopher would be another term in there. And if the first group is the uncultured group, this is the cultured group. This is the cultured group. The snobs, right? The people who are learned, who know things.
Yep. He says, when you who judge someone else. So these people are looking at the people from chapter 1, just like, such uncivilized people. Look at what they're doing. Look at what they're wearing. Can you believe that they made their little statues and they worship them?
Yeah.
You know what? You need Jesus too.
Yeah. And therefore you are without excuse, whoever you are, when you judge someone else. And then the part that really hurts. For on whatever ground you judge another, you condemn yourself. Because you who judge practice the same thing.
You're doing the same thing.
Exactly.
You may not be building a statue, but you're worshiping something that was created rather than the creator. I mean, he says, okay, are you running around the deepest, darkest parts of wherever, or living in a penthouse mansion? Doesn't matter. You're doing the same thing.
You still have a problem.
Yeah, names are changed to protect the guilty. I mean, that's really what it is. Yep. And in this one, so if the first group he says creation is the obvious thing for you. The second group, he says, conscience is the obvious thing. The conscience is what condemns you. Creation condemns them.
Right.
Conscience
of the thought process
condemns you. Yeah. In verse say start at verse 14. Whenever the Gentiles who do not have the law, the Mosaic law, do by nature the things required by the law, like, you know what, I've never murdered anybody. Well, where did that come from, do you suppose? Well, I just know it's wrong. Well, they show that they are a law to themselves because they show that the work of the law is written in their heart as their conscience bears witness, and their conflicting thoughts either accuse or defend them.
Right.
So what we have, God has given everybody creation, and at least some people, if not everybody, conscience. Again, that's enough to condemn, but it's not enough to save.
Right. So then we have this third group, right? And the third group happens to be the Jews.
That's right. You know what? Jews need Jesus too.
Yeah. As you would expect, Paul kind of blasts the Jews here. Being a former Jew, he knows all the ins and outs, right? So, and I know, God is talking through Paul, but Paul seems to enjoy this part of it, and basically condemning the teachers.
Well, think of the escalation. So we have the uncivilized pagans,
right.
And then we have the civilized pagans looking down, those people, and then you have the Jews. Right. Looking down and saying, they don't even have the law. God didn't talk to them. Look at all of this benefit that we have. We're Jews. We're God's chosen people. And Paul said, yeah, so
act
why are you rejecting?
Yeah, why aren't you doing what you're supposed to be doing?
Yep.
And their inability to follow the law, and from a Christian standpoint, we would say that's why Jesus had to come,
right?
Because they couldn't follow the law,
right? But the premise or the thing that we have to remember is, and this is an evangelistic technique, not a technique, but an evangelistic reminder, is you can't get someone saved if they're not lost, right? So does the uncivilized pagan think they're lost? No. Does the civilized pagan think they're lost? No. Does the Jew think they're lost? No.
Not.
And yet we all are. Right. And the thing is that everybody on the planet fits into one of those categories. And so what Paul does in the first 2 chapters is he gets everybody lost.
Yeah. Well, but if we think about our standard gospel message and we use the ABCs, the first one is, admit you're a sinner.
Yep. That's the lost part.
It took 2 chapters to do it.
Well, he was a little
much more efficient.
Yeah. But that's exactly what he was doing. He was saying you've got to come to the realization that you are lost, that you're a sinner, that you've got creation, you've got conscience, you've got the law. Every group has at least one thing that condemns them and condemns them and condemns them. So now, where do I go with that?
Yeah.
Well, you got to wait for chapter 3.
Yes, that's next week. Yep.
But where do I go with that? But that's the thing. Everybody's lost. Everybody needs a savior. There is no one safe, at least in Paul's.
Well, and a hint for us would be the B, which is believe in Jesus.
Believe in Jesus,
who He is and what He did for us.
Yep, as the only way of salvation.
Yeah. And in fact, he even says that according to my gospel through Jesus Christ.
Yep.
In this week.
Yep.
So he's bringing Jesus in early.
Yep.
Yeah.
But that is the we can't talk. People want to argue theology and all this other stuff. If we're not believers yet, and I have this thing when I talk with people, it's like, I want to argue all this stuff. Like, we're not even on the same page. Right. We're not, and it's not because I'm better than anybody, but if you're not a believer and I am, we're coming at it from 2 completely different worldviews. So when Paul starts his thesis, like you called it, he wants to start with everybody on the same page.
Yeah.
And you can't get to the gospel part, you can't get people saved if you don't have them lost. And so he spends 2 chapters saying, you are, or were, because these were believers that he was writing to. But we have to make sure we have a theology of sin before we can get to a theology of salvation.
Yeah, very nice.
Yeah.
So that's next week?
That is next week.
Ooh.
Next week we get into justification and all this other really, really good stuff.
All these other big words.
Yeah. But for all of us listening and watching, we're going to try to make sure that we have good theology. And especially if you're an evangelist or you've been trying to share the gospel with somebody, let's not short circuit. We want to jump to the good news. The good news, Jesus died for you. Why?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, they need to know.
Well, so that you can go to heaven. Well, why? Well, because you're a bad person. I'm a pretty good person.
Better than
I'm better than exactly. I'm better than that group. I'm better than that group. I'm a really good person. I never do this or this or this or this or this. You have to have a good theology of sin. And so this week, as you're reading, let Paul's theology of sin really saturate into your mind and heart, and it'll help your evangelistic efforts as well.
Yeah, good.
And it'll remind us just who we really are.
Yeah, exactly.
All of us need that reminder. So. Yep, good. Well, that's where we'll end this time, and next week we'll get into the doctrine of salvation a little bit more, which will be great. Make sure you're sharing this with your friends and family, other people that you think could use or would be benefited by this, and we'll see you back here next time in chapter 3.